Fog drifts over late-night New York streets while neon signs flicker and police sirens echo in the distance. A sleek black sedan slides past the camera, its headlights cutting through the mist. Out steps a man in an immaculate silk suit, his hair perfectly slicked back, his diamond pinky ring catching every flash of light. He is John Gotti, a street kid who climbed the ranks of the Mafia to rule the most powerful crime family in America. To neighbors, he is a hero, handing out cash at block parties and charming reporters with a movie star smile. To rivals and the FBI, he is a ruthless king who orders hits with a nod and laughs when the law tries to catch him. They call him the Teflon Don because charges never stick, no matter how many trials or how many dead bodies lie in his shadow. Tonight you'll enter the world of the Gambino family at the height of its power, where loyalty is bought with blood and betrayal is a death sentence. This is not a Hollywood fantasy. It's the real story of how power, betrayal, and murder built an empire the law could barely touch, and how John Gotti made himself untouchable. New York City in the 1970s and 80s was a city of glittering nightlife and grinding poverty, a place where 5 powerful mafia families quietly dictated the rhythm of the streets. Among them, the Gambino organization stood as the richest and most feared, pulling strings in construction, trucking, drugs, and high-stakes gambling. In this shadowy world of power and money, a boy from the Bronx named John Gotti discovered his calling. Charismatic yet volatile, he learned early that fear could open doors faster than charm, and that loyalty was everything, until it wasn't. By his 20s, he was hijacking freight at JFK Airport and running a tight-knit crew that earned millions, all while building an image of the neighborhood protector. Gotti's mix of ruthless discipline and movie star confidence set him apart from other mobsters who preferred to remain unseen. He didn't just want a slice of the pie, he wanted the throne. As the old guard of the Gambino family clung to tradition, Gotti plotted a daring path to the top, a plan that would rewrite the rules of organized crime. But every step upward meant more enemies, more FBI attention, and a trail of betrayal waiting to explode. This is the true story of how a streetwise kid rose to become the infamous Teflon Don, how his public swagger captured America's imagination, and how his own ambition would ignite the events that brought the entire empire crashing down. Tonight, you'll witness the cunning moves, the bloody rivalries, and the dramatic downfall of the man who turned the Mafia into primetime spectacle and paid the ultimate price for power. John Gotti was born on October 27, 1940, into a large and struggling Italian-American family in the South Bronx. The 5th of 13 children, he grew up in a cramped tenement where money was scarce and opportunities were even scarcer. His father, a day laborer, often drifted between jobs, and the family lived hand to mouth. From an early age, John absorbed a simple lesson. If you wanted more than the bare minimum, you had to take it. The streets of New York became his classroom, and petty crime was the curriculum. By the time he was a teenager, he was skipping school regularly, running errands for local gangsters, and stealing anything he could sell for a few dollars: cigarettes, radios, even entire truckloads of merchandise. When the chance arose. The 1950s Bronx was a place where organized crime operated in plain sight. Social clubs doubled as headquarters for men who controlled gambling, loan sharking, and protection rackets. Gotti watched these figures closely, fascinated by their sharp suits and easy confidence. He was arrested for the first time at age 14 for stealing copper wire, but a quick release only deepened his appetite for the life he glimpsed on the corner. Each arrest taught him how to keep his mouth shut and his eyes open, qualities that impressed the older mobsters who noticed the fearless kid with a sly grin. By his late teens, Gotti was spending more time in Brooklyn, where the Gambino family held sway. There he encountered Agnello Neil Della Croce, a powerful underboss with a reputation for old-school discipline and quiet authority. Della Croce saw potential in the tough Bronx kid who never seemed rattled by police or rival crews. Under Neil's watchful eye, Gotti graduated from petty theft to more lucrative work, hijacking trucks at JFK Airport, collecting debts, and running gambling operations. These jobs required nerve and absolute loyalty, and Gotti delivered both. He didn't just follow orders, he executed them with a swagger that set him apart. One defining moment cemented his reputation. When a shipment of high-value cargo needed to be taken from a guarded warehouse, Gotti volunteered without hesitation. The job was dangerous, armed security, unpredictable schedules, but he organized the heist flawlessly, outsmarting the guards and moving the goods before anyone realized what had happened. Word spread quickly through the underworld. John Gotti was a man who could be trusted to handle serious business and keep quiet afterward. Visualize this period through archival black and white photos of crowded Bronx tenements, mugshots of a young Gotti with slicked back hair, and bustling street corners where men in fedoras whispered deals. These images capture the atmosphere of a city that bred both desperation and ambition. For Gotti, the Bronx was not just home. It was the crucible that forged a future mafia powerhouse, transforming a restless street punk into a rising figure in the Gambino crime family. John Gotti's move from a fearless young hustler to a recognized power inside the Gambino organization began in the late 1960s, when New York's major airports were fertile ground for ambitious thieves. At JFK Airport, freight trucks carried everything from designer clothes to precious metals, and security was lax enough for crews with nerve and organization to strike repeatedly. Gotti put together a tight-knit team that planned hijackings with military precision. They would scout a target for days, track drivers' habits, and strike at the perfect moment, making entire shipments vanish before sunrise. These heists generated hundreds of thousands of dollars and earned Gotti a reputation as a dependable earner who delivered big scores without unnecessary bloodshed. While his nights were filled with crime, his home life painted a different picture. In 1962, he married Victoria DiGiorgio, a quiet, steadying presence who preferred privacy to the flashy world her husband inhabited. Together, they would raise 5 children, and Gotti was, by all accounts, a devoted husband and father, attending school events, insisting the kids stay away from crime, and showering them with gifts. Neighbors saw a smiling family man who hosted backyard barbecues and handed out cash to local kids. Few realized that the same man who tucked his children into bed might spend the next evening planning a multi-million-dollar hijacking. Gotti's loyalty to the Gambino family was tested in 1973, when mob associate James McBratney kidnapped and murdered the nephew of Carlo Gambino. Ordered to avenge the killing, Gotti joined a 3-man hit team. Disguised as police officers, they lured McBratney into a Staten Island bar and shot him dead. It was a calculated, cold-blooded execution that demonstrated Gotti's willingness to kill when the family demanded it. Though arrested for the crime, he avoided a long sentence through a plea bargain, further enhancing his legend as a man who could beat the system. That same year, Gotti's growing influence and proven loyalty earned him formal induction as a made man, a fully initiated member of the Gambino crime family. This status gave him protection, power, and the authority to run his own crew out of the Bergen Hunt and Fish Club in Queens. He demanded discipline, expected absolute silence if the police came calling, and rewarded those who performed. Associates knew that working for Gotti meant both profit and danger, but his charisma and steady stream of money kept his crew fiercely loyal. By the mid-1970s, he had positioned himself not just as a successful earner, but as a rising star with ambitions that reached far beyond the airport tarmacs of New York. John Gotti's rise to the very top of the Gambino crime family began with an audacious challenge to the old guard. By the early 1980s, the family's official boss, Paul Castellano, ruled with a businessman's mentality, favoring discretion and white-collar schemes over the traditional street operations that had made the organization rich. Many soldiers and captains resented Castellano's distant style and his ban on drug dealing, which was viewed as a lucrative opportunity. Gotti, who thrived on action and commanded loyalty from his Bergen crew, saw both a grievance and an opening. He quietly cultivated allies among captains who shared his frustration, and he paid close attention to Castellano's every misstep, waiting for the moment to strike. That moment arrived in late 1985. Castellano scheduled a meeting at Sparks Steakhouse in Midtown Manhattan, unaware that his own men were plotting his death. Gotti and his trusted lieutenants arranged a textbook ambush. Shooters disguised in trench coats and Russian-style hats waited outside while lookouts tracked Castellano's car. On December 16th, as Castellano stepped from his vehicle, gunmen opened fire, killing both the boss and his driver in a storm of bullets that stunned New York. From a car nearby, Gotti calmly observed the hit, ensuring the job was done before slipping away into the night. The murder was as daring as it was risky, but it left no question about who now held real power. Within weeks, Gotti was unanimously chosen as the new boss of the Gambino family, the most powerful of New York's 5 families. Unlike his predecessor, he embraced the spotlight. He wore $1,000 Brioni suits and flashed diamond pinky rings, turning courtroom appearances into fashion statements. He strolled through his Queens neighborhood shaking hands, handing out cash, and chatting with residents who began calling him a hero. The media, captivated by his swagger and ability to dodge convictions, christened him the Teflon Don, after a series of high-profile trials ended in acquittals. Under Gotti's leadership, the Gambino family flourished. He expanded operations in construction, labor unions, and loan sharking, while maintaining a grip on illegal gambling and narcotics through trusted crews. Associates described him as both charming and fearsome. He rewarded loyalty lavishly but punished betrayal with ruthless efficiency. His open defiance of law enforcement, holding meetings in the Ravenite social club despite constant surveillance, made him a celebrity and a symbol of Mafia invincibility. Yet his very visibility carried hidden dangers. The FBI, humiliated by repeated failures to convict him, intensified its efforts, planting listening devices and recruiting informants. Inside the family, some worried that Gotti's appetite for fame and his public taunts of prosecutors would eventually draw deadly attention. But in these early years of his reign, none of that seemed to matter. John Gotti had defied tradition, eliminated his rivals, and taken the crown. The streets of New York belonged to the Teflon Don, and for a time it appeared that no one, not the law, not his enemies, could touch him. As the 1990s began, John Gotti's dazzling reign as the Teflon Don started to show dangerous cracks. His love of publicity, which once thrilled the media and neighborhood admirers, became a flashing beacon for federal investigators. The FBI and the U.S. Attorney's Office built specialized teams focused solely on bringing him down, learning from past mistakes and adapting their methods. They intensified electronic surveillance, planted listening devices in cars, apartments, and most crucially, inside the Ravenite social club, Gotti's own headquarters in Little Italy where he held frequent meetings. Every boast, complaint, or order spoken there became evidence waiting to be used. Within the Gambino family, frustration was also growing. Gotti ruled with an iron hand, demanding absolute loyalty and expecting rich tributes from captains. He enjoyed the high life, lavish parties, designer suits, and constant media attention, while many soldiers risked prison to keep money flowing. Some worried his arrogance was reckless, drawing unnecessary heat from law enforcement and rival families. Among the uneasy was his underboss and longtime confidant, Salvatore "Sammy the Bull" Gravano. Gravano had been fiercely loyal, helping plan the Castellano assassination and running key operations, but he began to question Gotti's decisions. He feared the boss's public swagger and constant exposure would doom them all. The FBI's covert recordings only deepened those doubts. Bugs captured Gotti criticizing Gravano behind his back, blaming him for murders and hinting that Gravano might be expendable. When Gravano eventually heard these tapes after his own arrest, the betrayal cut deep. Facing the possibility of life in prison and feeling discarded by the man he'd served faithfully, Gravano made a shocking choice. He agreed to cooperate with the government. It was unprecedented for an underboss of a major crime family to turn state's witness, and it instantly shattered the aura of untouchability Gotti had cultivated. Gravano's testimony was a prosecutor's dream. He provided vivid details of murders, extortion schemes, and the inner workings of the Gambino empire. Combined with hundreds of hours of FBI recordings, the case against Gotti was overwhelming. The so-called Teflon Don, who had laughed through earlier trials, was suddenly cornered by the very organization he once controlled so effortlessly. Meanwhile, paranoia spread through the ranks. Soldiers who once idolized Gotti now feared that every conversation might be bugged, every ally a potential informant. The once tight-knit empire he had built on fear and charisma began to splinter under the weight of distrust and federal pressure. Gotti, who had always prided himself on strength and loyalty, found himself isolated, betrayed not only by an underboss he considered family, but also by the very culture of omerta, the Mafia's code of silence, that had protected him for years. By the time the government unsealed its case in 1991, the image of the untouchable Don had given way to a man trapped by his own bravado. What began as whispers of discontent had grown into a roar of betrayal, and the final showdown with the law was no longer a question of if, but when. The final chapter of John Gotti's saga began in earnest in 1992, when his long dance with the law finally ended in a federal courtroom. After years of evading justice, he faced a mountain of evidence, hundreds of hours of FBI recordings, testimony from former allies, and the damning words of his one-time underboss, Salvatore "Sammy the Bull" Gravano. The trial was a spectacle unlike any Mafia case before it. Reporters packed the gallery, cameras flashed outside the courthouse, and the public watched as the man who once seemed untouchable sat stone-faced in a plain suit, listening as former friends described murders and multi-million-dollar rackets in chilling detail. The jury deliberated only a short time before delivering a sweeping conviction on charges of murder, racketeering, and conspiracy. When the verdict was read, Gotti remained composed, giving nothing away. The judge sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole. For the man who had mocked law enforcement and strutted past photographers in $1,000 suits, it was a stunning fall. The Teflon Don was suddenly stripped of the myth that had protected him for so long. Gotti was sent to the high-security United States Penitentiary in Marion, Illinois, one of the most restrictive prisons in the country. Confined to a small cell for 23 hours a day, he remained defiant. He continued to issue orders to the Gambino family through coded messages and loyal visitors, trying to maintain influence even as federal authorities tightened restrictions. But the empire he left behind was crumbling. Without his forceful presence, rival factions fought for power, revenues dropped, and the family's dominance in New York's underworld steadily eroded. Despite the walls around him, Gotti retained a strange celebrity. Supporters mailed him letters, tabloids reported on his health, and some still referred to him as a folk hero who had outwitted the government for years. Yet prison life took its toll. By the late 1990s, he was battling throat cancer, a disease worsened by years of heavy smoking. Multiple surgeries and treatments failed to stop its spread, and in June 2002, John Gotti died at the age of 61, far from the flashy streets where he once reigned. His death marked more than the end of a single man's story. It symbolized the fading era of the classic American mafia boss. The Gambino family survived, but never regained the unchallenged power it held during Gotti's heyday. His legacy remains conflicted. To some, he was a charismatic neighborhood protector. To others, a ruthless killer whose ambition destroyed lives and brought relentless heat on organized crime. Today, the myth of John Gotti continues to fascinate because it embodies the allure and the cost of power. He turned the Mafia into headline entertainment, relishing the attention that ultimately ensured his downfall. In the end, the same traits that made him famous, his boldness, his defiance, his taste for the spotlight, became the forces that doomed him. The empire built on fear and loyalty dissolved into betrayal and silence, leaving behind the cautionary tale of a man who believed he could outlast the law, but discovered that even the Teflon Don could not escape forever.